Legacy is just a bunch of pillars and fillers.
Next on Eternal Durdles. Hey, I just want to give a quick shout out to all of our Patreon supporters out there. Thank you to the Durdle Maniacs. If you want to be a Durdle Maniac, go to patreon.com/eternaldurdles and help support the channel. It keeps things going. It keeps things updated. Thanks so much for watching. On with the show. Hello and welcome to Eternal Durdles. I'm your host, Zach Clark, and with me as always, Phil Bleckman. Phil, how's it going, man?
All right, Zach, so we know what cards are the most played cards in Legacy, and Brainstorm's at an all-time low.
That's weird, right? And also, I feel like I didn't get a super good look at that, but also, isn't Force of Will at an all-time low, too?
No, Force of Will is the only card that's over 50% of the format.
But it is at an all-time low for Force of Will.
I'm going to double-check. We are looking at the
It's not an all-time low. All-time low was 2018 or 2019 apparently.
Yeah, we're looking at the great Pete Vanderham's graph here that will share a link down below to the Twitter thread discussing it.
Yeah,
and it's an image that shows all of the most played cards in Legacy over the past year.
It's fun to look at this because you can look at a time, right, and just see like what was going on. And if we look at, what 2015, what was happening during 2015? Treasure Cruise. That's why those are so high.
Yeah.
Like
so
if you weren't drawing 3 cards for 1 mana, what were you doing?
So this map graphs essentially all of the cards, or not all the cards, but like the premier cards and where they're seeing play from 2011 until through 2024.
Yeah.
And it's got Bowmasters on the chart scaled to the full year because it hasn't been out for a full year yet. So Force of Will is the only card that has a play rate over 50%. It is played currently at, let me find it, 53.5%. Everything else is below the threshold. Brainstorm, for the first time, has been below 50% since 2021. So the last 2 years, it's just been on this downward trend below 50%.
Yeah.
Bowmasters is the most played creature by a wide margin at 40%.
Yeah, I think, what's the next creature after that?
Deathrite Shaman was banned in 2018 after it had a threshold just over that.
Okay.
So around 45%, 44-ish, 45% is when Deathrite was banned for reasons of diversity for the format. And Bowmasters is creeping up to that.
Yep.
And nobody's calling for it. Nobody wants it. Nobody's seeing.
Here's the thing: is the next creature on that list, on this list, the next creature is Thalia at like 12%.
No. Thalia. This is not like
not
all
even
the top creatures. That's just a reference point to show you where D&T is at.
I see. Okay.
I was
like, it seems odd that Thalia is the next most played creature.
Urza Saga is also not on here, but like instead Ancient Tomb is. Lotus Petal, Ancient Tomb are now above 30% for the first time.
Above Daze.
So they are significant. Of course, like the last 3 years with all the Commander product and stuff has really subsidized subsidized Ancient Tomb. And Ancient Tomb is, in discussion as the most powerful card in the format. And we see that here as it's been on a very steady trajectory since 2021. So, it's been on an upward trajectory since 2015, but it got way steeper alongside Lotus Petal, because if you're doing the stompy stuff, you're doing it alongside Lotus Petal. And so we are seeing Brainstorm trend down, Daze is trending up, and this is where we want to talk about pillars and fillers.
Pillars and fillers. Yeah, let's start it off, Phil.
So I was at my local the other day, and I played a Beanstalk mirror. I was playing Miracles with Beanstalk. I was playing against the 4-color Beanstalk list that won EW. Mm-hmm. And I was discussing with my opponent that, these matches come down to whoever has up the Beanstalk, and then that's it. And we've talked about it on the cast before.
Yeah.
My personal opinion is that, like, in a Beanstalk mirror, the only thing that matters is Beanstalk, and that's it. And then if you're at Beanstalk parity, the next thing that matters is Force of Wills, and whoever has more Force of Wills wins.
I think it's important to outline why that is, Phil, because it's not necessarily the case with all cards. Why having the card first is the better option. And a perfect example is it's not always best to have Orcish Bowmaster first, because then your Bowmaster is the second player hits the Bowmaster with their Bowmaster, right? But
I'm not saying you need to have Beanstalk first. I'm saying you need to have more Beanstalks than your opponent.
Agreed, but I think that the first Beanstalk that hits the board gives that person a much higher advantage in the game, and that's just because raw card draw, right? Bowmaster doesn't draw you cards, so I think if you end up being the first person to get more resources, that's why having I mean, I know this sounds super elementary, but follow me down this insane path for a second. Having more resources generally wins you the game and stops your opponent from putting their resources into play. Am I going out on a limb too far for that?
No, I mean what you're saying makes sense. I'm saying I'm getting a little bit more granular in that.
Yes.
The way that the format is that it's not just Beanstalk. Beanstalk is just the most glaring representation to me of this of this paradigm that has shifted for, I think, all of the decks in the all the premier decks in the format right now, where whatever archetype you're playing, there is a pillar of that sphere of the format that essentially will dictate every game that it's involved in. And the games where you have it versus don't have it are incredibly lopsided one way. So, but for Bowmaster, I don't think Bowmaster itself is the thing.
No, I agree.
I think Bowmaster, just the fact that Bowmaster is just so good in every facet of every possible play pattern that could ever arise outside of exactly fast combo that's not drawing cards. Because it's good against both creatures and drawing cards, and it goes wide, and it does everything, right?
Yeah.
So the fact that it does everything gives it the nod as this freebie thing. It has flash, it does it all. Nobody needs to be, lectured on how good Bowmaster is. It's 40% of the meta, and it's not going down anytime soon. And in order to beat Bowmaster, you have to play Bowmaster. But to a harder extent, I think that for Daze Wasteland Shell, that's been a pillar of the format since its inception, that the combination of the threats now with Daze Wasteland makes it so that the pillar of the format, Daze Wasteland, is so much stronger than is so much stronger than previous times when the threats weren't so consistently densely powerful, because now you don't have just if I draw Delver Daze Wasteland, that's good. You are effectively mathematically guaranteed to draw Delver on turn 1 between Delver and DRC.
Sure.
So your Daze Wasteland plus threat shells on the draw are just in the percentile of 9 out of 10 games. That's what their start is going to be. I forget exactly who I was chatting with, but imagine you're sitting across from a Delver player and they go Volcanic Island Ponder, and you breathe a sigh of relief. If that's not indicative, if that's not indicative of where the format power is now situated, that it probably turns their Bowmaster face up, right? But aside from that, the fact that they didn't put the thing that is oppressive on the table, which is very, very fast clock that beats down plus the Daze Wasteland thing.
Yeah.
But before, when people are oh, you can play around Daze, you can just not play into it and play off curve. But the effectiveness of that depreciates significantly if the clock that you're if the hits to the face that you're taking are so much more devastating by comparison to if they played a Nimble Mongoose. Now, we talked about that before, but I'm saying the combination between DRC, Bowmaster, which is a Flame Rift at the baseline, right?
Mm-hmm.
At its baseline, it's a Flame Rift that they can play around sorcery speed removal, and Murktide Regent makes it so that the hits that you take off these things makes it all the more punishing to the point where you can't really play around that Daze in a way where it's you just play around it. You can't do that.
Well, it's that consistency too. What you're just saying about almost guaranteeing a turn 1 Delver. It's not just that you're guaranteeing a turn 1 Delver. It's that your follow-up plays are so much more consistent. After you you basically, if you allow your opponent, you could take 3 damage for 7 turns and win the game. It can happen. You've got that amount of time in Legacy. But because the follow-up play is yet another 3 mana or 1 mana 3/3 or whatever, and then the follow-up to that is a 2 mana 5/5 or larger, that cuts down significantly on the amount of time you have to one, to recover from a day's play, but two, to play around the days to begin with. I think that's what you're getting at.
I'm getting at that the way that we view pillars of the format now versus pillars of the format of old, with the power level of the format so starkly increased from like a time when we've had those discussions previously, that the pillars of the format are so much more important in terms of like how we have to view them. And this is also coming off the back of the recent ban announcement where the WotC guys were like, for Legacy, we are going to take in a lot of community feedback, and that's going to influence how we proceed with our bannings, which essentially just, my read was that it's just, if the community is vocal enough, then you can make a ban happen, regardless of what the numbers might say, right?
If you can get Grubhub to order enough pizzas, you can get Orcish Bowmaster banned.
And we I've made the pizza at the whatever joke plenty of times, but like I think that there isn't a consensus on like what the pillars look like and how we should view the pillars, because everybody is sort of still enjoying this time of renewed legacy of black being the most dominant color,
the era of good feelings, as I like to call it.
And the power level of like Urza Saga decks, the power level of Daze decks, the power level of Beanstalk decks, like it all comes down onto if you've played 8-cast for however many years at this point, right?
At least one.
The games where you have Urza Saga versus the games where you don't have Urza Saga is so lopsidedly different in terms of the power level of the deck that it's like, it's just not close, right? If you have a multiple Urza Saga draw, you can just let the deck play itself to get you wins because you're just going to produce, 30 power uncounterable around sorcery speed action, and then tutor for whatever you need. And the point that I'm making is that we have to, as a community, reassess how powerful the pillars are and then recalibrate our relationship to those pillars with how we view them in terms of the discussion for is this good for the format or not. Now, looking at these numbers, we know that Bowmaster is in all these different kinds of decks, and it's at 41% scaled for the year, right? It hasn't been out for a full year, so it's not like that's not a hard and fast number. That's a number that's been scaled if it was for a full year. Now, in terms of if we compare that, Deathrite Shaman was banned right as it hit the 40.5% marker, right? 45% DRC is gone for the sake of diversity. Now Bowmaster is within those numbers, and it's not even in the discussion. But if you listen to this podcast, you listen to any other podcast, anybody that you've talked with about like things that Bowmaster is doing to it would be cool to play a bunch of these things, but you can't do that because Bowmaster.
Sure.
Now, if a bunch of X1s and a bunch of other whatever stuff is getting pushed out because half the field is Bowmaster, and then we're thinking format diversity, we have to, just because you can play Bowmaster and everything doesn't mean that it's good for format diversity. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I feel like I'm not fully clarifying this point, but I think that for our purposes, when we look at something like Urza Saga, when we look at something like Daze plus the powerful threats that are embedded within it, when we look at something like Beanstalk, that the games may feel fresh now, and I want us to be clear-eyed that if and when it becomes stale, because it's very clearly that these cards are the oppressors of the format, that we can realistically look at how we should take action against them, because it does not seem sustainable to me that you can look at a bunch of cards that are being subsidized by these cards that otherwise would see zero play, and then you see a bunch of cards that are soft banned because these cards exist. So for Beanstalk, Leyline Binding does not exist in the format if Beans is not there, right? Well, it's only there because Beanstalk exists. Now, if you look at Beanstalk decks and Delver Daze Wasteland decks, they're both Orcish Bowmaster Murktide decks, right? Is it good that 2/3 of the Legacy metagame are the same creatures, and then the ones that aren't are just Bowmaster or just Urza Saga decks?
Phil, I want to call out 2 points, and they're in contention with each other to begin with. They're two completely opposite points that I want to bring up. One, again, we're looking at 41% scaled for the year, right? Which means that we haven't even had a whole year with this card. I say all that to say this. We don't know what's around the corner. You know, how long was Deathrite Shaman before, you know, Deathrite Shaman started to see a spike in play. It looks like in 2015. Oh, odd. Right after they banned Treasure Cruise. that card started shooting up. But
right after they banned Treasure Cruise, and it also got an additional bump in Resurgent when they banned Top because people weren't trying to Terminus as hard.
Yeah. So, yeah, you're correct. So I say all that to say this. There was a point in time, Phil, and this was in Modern, when people were crying for the banning of Snapcaster Mage, which is a laughable idea now, but it was a serious thought at the time, right? No one even plays that card anymore in Legacy, or I don't even think in Modern anymore. It's just not a card people like. This is before they banned Splinter Twin. They were like, hey, another option before taking out Splinter Twin is ban Snapcaster Mage so the deck doesn't have all that, you know, utility. And you know what? No one would even play Snapcaster Mage in any of those formats now. I think I'm correct in that statement as far as considering this for Modern, right? Now, I say all that to say this. Because of that, I don't think that within a year, based on power creep, that we're going to be playing Orcish Bowmaster to the point that it's being played. I think they're going to keep doing stuff like, you know, here's a shot in the dark. It's Brainstorm, but it exiles cards instead. You know, they're going to start making these cards that, like, don't interact properly with it so that you can basically ignore Bowmaster or something like that. You know, and not because of Bowmaster. I just think that weird, you know, what was that thing they said? Infinite design space? I don't believe that. There is a very finite amount of design space that exists, and they just occasionally stumble upon an idea like Seek the Beast that changes how they design cards, right? They're like, oh, what we'll do is we'll just make all the red ones exile effects, you know? So I say all that to say this. Like I said before, I think that we're early on Bowmaster, but I don't think it's out of the realm possibility that it could be banned, you know, by March. You know, that now my other point is against Bowmaster, and that point is Bowmaster is a blue fucking red card, dude. It's a blue red card. You're just subsidizing your mana base slightly to play a black card that is really either blue or red. It deals with drawing, it deals damage. It's not a black card, you know? And so for Bowmaster to be the thing that brings black back into the metagame, that makes black a playable color, is blasphemy as far as I'm concerned. Your thoughts?
I think you touched on what I was talking about with the Snapcaster comment, where you're saying that nobody would consider playing that now. And that's what I'm talking about recalibrating how we look at cards in context.
Mm-hmm.
The context of the format as it stands now, I think if we look at cards that are on the ban list, by comparison to the power level of cards now, the way that, like, our relationship to Deathrite in the confines of what it was when it was around, you still cringe when you hear Deathrite Shaman.
I hate it.
You hate it. You hate it in the context that it existed. Not the context that
I truly hate it. Go finish your point, but I want to tell you the real context that I hate it in. Go.
I'm saying that if we look at something like Beanstalk, which I think is leagues more powerful than Expressive Iteration, but Expressive Iteration is gone, and we still look, and like when we think of Expressive Iteration, we think, oh, it's mini dig through time, it's way too good. And I'm looking at Beanstalk drawing 6 to 8 cards over the course of the game before you're buried, just going, oh, this seems way better than you know, Expressive that theoretically can miss. You know, like they both at a baseline replace themselves, but it can miss and requires 2 colors.
Yeah,
like Beanstalk is just shoved into these 4-color shells. Now, don't get me wrong, Expressive was in the 4-color shells too, but
no one's playing mono green Beanstalk. Let's be honest.
There was a little bit more restriction. Now, there's a little bit more restriction because a lot of the context of Legacy at a baseline works with Beanstalk. Yeah. Force of Will works at a baseline with Beanstalk and is the best thing to be doing with it, right? Like if you want to be the blue-white X control deck with Force of Will, you're already incentivized before we even got here to play the 3rd color. Now, before we got to leyline binding, we were on prismatic ending, and everybody was like, oh, you could just pay extra to get it over 5 CMC so you can still draw a card. But prismatic ending already incentivized you to go into at least a third color because you had to deal with the planeswalkers and shit. Okay, so we were already there. So once we realized that, like, oh, in order to keep up with like opposing Beanstalk shells, the arms race continued. We talked about that before. And you go, oh, I need to be better at this arms race, which is all about Beanstalk. So then leyline binding gets subsidized entirely by the card's existence. Prismatic ending gets pushed out. Leyline binding comes in. Leyline binding incentivizes even more colors. We move into the 4-color shells. We're there. Beanstalk incentivizes even more of that, so we go into the mid-range versions with Murktide Regent attached to it. And now the best creatures that we can be playing, which are Bowmaster, which just gets there on rate because we're incidentally asking for the additional color anyway because of leyline binding. And then we just want more things that work with Beanstalk. It just so happens that Murktide is the only other reasonable delve spell to play. So, you know, and all of that means that we're going to move away from Uro because we want to play the thicker stuff. Like, but you see how all of these other things that are coming in, like the 4-color deck playing Murktide, they're not playing Murktide just because Murktide's a busted card. It is, but they're not doing it just because of that. They were on Uro. They weren't on Murktide. But then they were like, oh, Beanstalk's the best thing. So Beanstalk is subsidizing Murktide coming into that shell.
Yeah, is it better to pay 2 and draw a card or to pay 3 and draw a card and gain 3 life? And they're like, it's better to pay 2.
Yeah, when I'm saying like when I say like the pillars though, it's like we can look at Murktide and go, okay, Murktide is in both the expressive is both in the Delver shells and the Beanstalk shells. Yeah. But that's not an indictment necessarily of Murktide. If you look at like what's evolving around it, it's like for the Beanstalk side, it's specifically the Beanstalk. Because you're only playing Murktide because it triggers Beanstalk, and you're just like, oh, here's a very powerful, good threat, but it has draw a card tacked on.
And it replaces itself,
That's So and then vice versa, if you look at any Urza Saga deck with any of the additional, like literally every single thing that goes along with the Urza Saga package is being subsidized by the Urza Saga. A bunch of decks that exist are being subsidized by a single individual card. And when I'm talking about the pillars and then the rest of decks being filler, I'm saying that filler, that stuff is only there because there's this baseline individually powerful obscene card that furthers that shell. Now, you could argue that in the Delver side that's something that's closer to DRC than it is to Daze. I think like Daze may have its own issue.
Yeah.
But I'm saying the way that we have to think about, okay, we cringe when we hear Expressive Iteration, we cringe when we hear Deathrite Shaman, but like these cards that exist now are at the same numbers and doing arguably more powerful and more oppressive things. When Deathrite Shaman was around, it checked Reanimator a little bit. Okay, you know, I personally think like the degenerate stuff getting checked isn't a negative thing. But on the side of Bowmaster, it's like it's tough to run your X1 that doesn't draw you a card.
Yeah, not to mention like drawing cards is a part of the game. It's just like it's not Hull Breacher where it's completely cutting it off, but it feels so weird that, you know, okay, I need to answer this problem. You know, my whole deck is based on like figuring out how to do that by giving me card selection, and a lot of that's card draw. So it's weird. To me, it's a weird card to have to deal with because it forces you to find answers for it, and the way you do that in this game is drawing cards.
I want to just clarify my previous statement real quick.
Yeah.
I'm not saying Eternal Dirtle's calling for bans of these cards yet.
No, I've got time on that. I think,
what I'm saying is, when that time comes, which it inevitably will, the assessment that we need to look at is, I think, is cards in context and how that would look now. Because if Expressive Iteration also existed now in the format, maybe there's a little bit of push and pull because Expressive Iteration doesn't draw cards. So do we look at that with do we look more towards that and less towards Beanstalk? Beanstalk incentivizes you to play with all these fat, thick things. Expressive Iteration doesn't want fat, thick things. Like, do you steer towards Beanstalk? Do you steer towards Expressive? If you're in Delver, like the fact that the Delver shell has churned through so many cards getting banned that haven't been Daze, it's essentially just gotten to replace those slots with something else.
With something, often something better.
But that's what I'm saying. In context, they've been progressively stronger, but they've never existed at the same time to see which things would necessarily weed out others to actually incentivize any amount of diversity. So if Dreadhorde Arcanist and Expressive Iteration and Orcish Bowmaster all existed at the same time, and Deathrite Shaman
and Treasure Cruise.
But you see what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah,
if,
of course.
if like
So
I've been seeing people playing a lot of Timeless recently on Arena and having a blast and being like, it's, I look at this and I'm like, this stuff looks degenerate. There's clearly like,
please leave me alone.
but looking at it and people going, oh, this is a lot of fun. I'm thinking like, oh, because it's kind of interesting. Like, if Oko and Luris both exist at the same time, like, there's actually a decision on actual legitimate power levels on both ends to be considered. Now, in my personal opinion, Luris is objectively way better and it's not close. But there is something to be said that, like, not everybody is going to have that same judgment. Yeah. But if the format, if like all the other powerful cards are gone and the only thing that's left are the clearly obvious pillars that are in the format now with nothing contending against them, then what you get is something like Grixis Delver both being Bowmaster Murktide decks and Four Color Beanstalk being Bowmaster Murktide decks, and then Urza Saga all being the exact same shells with like whatever combo finish, whether it's Painter or what's the one with the mono black one, with Beseech and
Helm.
Whatever, Helm, but they're all construct decks first, like. You know what I'm saying? Like, if there's no tension to combat pillars, then the pillars become solely the only playable things at a competitive level, and then that leads us to going, oh my god, these cards need to go. They're aggressive. They're pushing everything out, but because there's no tension against them, because we keep, you know what I mean? Because the other stuff that we're refusing to touch, like Daze, like whatever, makes it so that we go after these other things, and then something new comes in, just fills those slots, and we go through the same cycle over and over again.
Well, I think part of that issue, Phil, is there's no philosophy for what this format is as far as bans are concerned.
Zach, I'm so happy that you just made it so much clearer than I was trying to articulate. That was what I mean when I was saying that the legacy guys. When the legacy guys
down when you mentioned Deathrite Shaman, because when a little before Deathrite Shaman was banned in Modern, I had a 2-part series article about it called "It's Banned in Modern," and it was about the philosophy of banning things in Modern and why they do it. And there was a philosophy, and let me tell you, Phil, do you remember what the philosophy for why things get banned in Modern is, or what the philosophy of Modern is? Period.
I think the only one that anybody remembers is turn 4 kill philosophy.
No turn 3 kills.
Yep.
So that no old format boogeymen, and this is why I don't like Deathrite Shaman, because I don't like unbanning Deathrite Shaman. To me, I'm like, we've fucking seen it already. Let's not do it again. It's the same reason why like Golgari Grave Troll. Like, why did they unban Golgari Grave Troll? We don't need Dredge like in that format. And this is specifically talking about Modern here. And then the other one is format diversity. The best that we have for Legacy, and just to give you like kind of an idea about what that meant for Modern, was they didn't unban a lot of cards from fairies like Bitter Blossom for a very long time, which was like, sure, whatever, I guess. It took them a long time to ban dominant decks like Splinter Twin and Birthing Pod, and whether or not you feel like those should have been banned or not, it took them longer than it needed to because they didn't break any of these rules. And the only reason that they did get banned was because of format diversity. So if we take what we know from that, what we can extrapolate from how Wizards thinks about design and banning at all, like, we can at least pull something from that information, right? And translate it over to Legacy. What we know is that there are degenerate cards that need a place to live. We have gotten that definitively. We don't know what those cards are, but we do know that degenerate cards need a place to live, right? And format diversity. That's kind of all we know as far as like what the philosophy with Legacy is, aside from, if you bitch about it enough, we'll change it.
I would push back on that, because I think I would argue that right now we have more clarity on what WotC thinks about Legacy in terms of the ban list than any time ever, which is point
that's
blank.
Just the nature of time, I think.
No, I think like when they said point blank, we take in community feedback for Legacy more than other formats. I think that means that we have way more agency than we think.
Yeah.
So like
no, I'll agree with that.
When we're saying we're trying to get into WotC's heads, I think that like we can just tell them what's in our heads. And if anything, right now I'm advocating for stuff to come off, because I right now think that the pillars of the format, because they have no resistance against them, mean that they are objectively the best thing to be doing without any other consideration. And I think that like if you just stack up right now, imagine expressive iteration exists in the format. You're lining it up against up the beanstalk, and you're telling me that one is more powerful than the other to the point where one has to be on the ban list and the other's not.
I'm telling you, both of them deserve to be on the ban list.
I'm saying that I'm saying that like if both existed in the format at the same time, there's at least some amount of decision that you want to make about, and then that is going to incentivize diversity while the power level remains at the level that it would need to be competitive. Well, you know what I'm saying? Like I think it's better if either it all goes or it all exists.
I think there's a
range.
I think, Phil, there's a lot of meat on this bone, and it's something, we've got the unban episode coming up, so we're going to go over all of this stuff in depth, so I don't want to go too deep into the weeds on this, but I don't think that there's much of a choice if both those cards are unbanned. If you unban, so, Beanstalk's already unbanned. If you unban Expressive Iteration, you're playing Blue-Red Delver. And if you want to play Beanstalk, then you're playing the deck as it stands now. It doesn't change anything. It just means that you're probably not splashing green for Seek the Beast.
See, and this is where I hard disagree. If you're like, expressive iteration, so you just play blue-red, it's like, okay, so then suddenly Bowmaster's percent goes down. But if some percentage of the field is still going to play Beanstalk, don't you want to be playing Bowmaster? Does that mean that
Bowmaster is seeing like a maximum amount of play in Grixis decks? Honestly, I think it's seeing I'd have to look, but I think that it's seeing much more play overall in non-blue decks, and I'll go with Shadow too, but like non-blue red decks.
It's played as a 4-of in Scam. It's played as a 4-of in Grixis Delver. It's played as a 4-of in four-color Beanstalk.
No, I'm saying overall, like the overall percentage of the meta for those decks is lower than we think. We just see Bowmaster all the time and assume that it's coming from the most oppressive deck, but I really don't think that's the case.
Bowmaster scaled at 40%. What are we talking about?
No, I'm saying, okay, sorry. I'm saying Bowmaster exists at 40%. I hard agree with that. I'm saying Bowmaster in Brainstorm decks is not as big a number as you think it is. I'm saying it's a much bigger number. Some percentage of that 40% is non-Brainstorm decks, and I think that's where the card is getting so much. Like, if it wasn't able to be played in those other decks as just like a value card, it would not be at 40%. It's the fact that it has crossover appeal to all of those other decks is why it's up there. Which again. Look, that's why they banned Sensei's Divining Top, because Sensei's Divining Top, if it only fit into blue decks, would have never gotten banned because it wouldn't. Well,
it was played in two decks. It was played in 3 decks. It was played in Miracle, Storm, and Painter.
Correct.
And, right.
But those are all decks that like aren't don't like. Otherwise, they're moving parts. The only thing they want to do is just manipulate the top of their deck, right?
But they manipulated their top of the deck in very, very different ways. Yes. Now, I'm not coming to the defensive top here. I'm saying that like if we're looking, my whole thing here is that like we look at these cards of old in the context where they were too good because they never had any tension up against them because the stuff that could have tension against them were already on the ban list. And then same thing for cards now. There's like if Treasure Cruise and Murktide exist at the same time, don't get me wrong. I think Treasure Cruise is obviously better, but like, does everybody agree with that? I don't know. Maybe somebody's like, okay, well, you're drawing your 3 cards. I'm going to put this 8/8 into play and kick you in the face. Like, I'm saying that, like, whether or not everybody just plays Treasure Cruise instead of Murktide, I'm saying that there's not even the choice.
No, you're right. You're right.
We can't even have the argument of which one's better because they don't exist at the same time. There's no argument for which is the best option for the thing.
What'd be interesting is doing a they did no ban list modern tournament, and it was miserable. Let me tell you, it was like the worst thing ever. But it would be interesting for a major tournament series like Buffalo Chicken Dip or something to be like, we're gonna do one no ban list legacy tournament. Now, obviously, Power would be off the list, But things that were legitimately banned come back onto the list for like this one tournament. I'd be interested to see what choices people make.
I don't know how you actually, test for those things in a way that could.
Well, that was the problem with the modern tournament, is that there was no good way to test, and it turned out the people who won just played Eldrazi because that was the broken deck at the time.
I just want to reiterate that, like, the point that I'm making is the context with which these cards exist in, and how all of the context of the tension between those cards affects each of those cards. So, okay, let's say if Treasure Cruise came off the ban list, obviously it's too good, but if it came off the ban list, and you're thinking, okay, well, now I have to make a choice. Am I playing Murktide and Treasure Cruise? Am I playing some combination of both numbers? Bowmaster exists now. Do I want to be playing Treasure Cruise in the Bowmaster format? If DRC comes off, well, DRC. If Deathrite Shaman comes off, well, now Deathrite Shaman is checking both of those delve spells. Maybe I want to move less away from them and more towards something that doesn't work in the graveyard or play my own. Oh,
and now are you playing are you playing 12 1-drops in your Delver deck?
If Dreadhorde Arcanist comes off, Dreadhorde Arcanist is a 1/3 that also uses the graveyard. If Deathrite Shaman checks that, but now do I want to playing Dreadhorde Arcanist and my Delve spells? Well, if I'm playing all these 1/2s and 1/3s, Bowmaster maybe isn't so good, but people are playing Treasure Cruise, so maybe I do want some number of Bowmasters. And it's like, all of this in context on top of but Beanstalk is also really good. So maybe is Beanstalk plus Treasure Cruise, is that just like turbo drive? But then am I filling my deck with way too much fluff? Do I need more interaction? Where does that and now we're making choices on numbers, on actually lining stuff up, as opposed to the format just being, I'll Beanstalk, you'll Beanstalk, or I'll Bowmaster and then you'll Bowmaster my Bowmaster and I'll Bowmaster your Bowmaster, or we'll both just try and Murktide each other to the larger Murktide. And you know what I'm saying? The format as it stands right now, I think, is exceptionally boring because all we're getting is those things.
Point of fact to people like you and me who don't play the standard pillar of the format decks for the most part, Phil, is that shit's boring. If you it doesn't offer anything to somebody like me who's playing Infect or you who's playing Miracles. Those cards don't fit in those decks. But those cards get banned because they're good in the best decks.
Another example that I want to make too is the off of those things. Yes, I agree with what you just said, and to further that point, the fact that we don't get the opportunity for that kind of format diversity because of how cards on the ban list and how they might affect contextually with cards that exist now as well, and how they might not be as powerful as they once were. That, for example, what you were talking, yes, I like to play Miracles, and I would prefer not to play Leyland Binding if I don't have to, because I don't want to stress my mana base that way. I'm a Mystic Sanctuary gamer. I would much rather play Prismatic Ending instead of Leyline Binding. Now, Leyline Binding has a lot of advantages to it. It's instant speed. It can hit the One Ring, and it usually is going to trade up. It does work in conjunction with Beanstalk. But when I play Beanstalk, I am handicapping myself if I don't also play Leyline Binding.
Yeah, it's
because
ridiculous.
Leyline Binding is so subsidized by the card's existence.
Yeah.
If you play anything with Urza Saga, you kind of have to play the Shadow Spear. You kind of have to play the Mox Opal to fix the color after the fact, which incentivizes a certain amount of density of artifacts beyond the pale, unless you're playing something that's very obviously underpowered by comparison. So, but if expressive iteration existed in the same format as Beanstalk, well, now you're going, oh man, do I want to play expressive with Prismatic Ending? And then that's good against certain things. Prismatic Ending is way worse against Bowmasters, but expressive, which works better with Prismatic Ending than Leyline Binding, maybe better, but then maybe I can play 4-color and play expressive with Leyline Binding because I care about the removal. But then do I want to just be on the raw card draw? But the card draw, I'm going to get punished by Bowmaster, and I want to be less green than I want to be red. So now I'm making these choices, and it just becomes so much more intellectually stimulating to figure out what choices to make in your deck building. Whereas right now it's Beanstalk's the best thing to do. And the best thing with Beanstalk to removal wise is Leyline Binding. So I got to do that.
I think you just made a great point there, Phil. It is more stimulating to the individual for deck building purposes. It is overall, to me, less stimulating to be offered all these extremely even more powerful versions of cards and be well, which one do you think is the best? And then have to play against those cards.
I,
Just
like
throwing it out there as a point.
I wish we could live in a world where you could get a taste, because if we're scientists in the lab and we have the hypothesis that if stuff came off, to actually apply tension against the other cards that are just as powerful, if not more powerful, and actually run the gambit, my hypothesis would be that the format would be more fun and more diverse, because there's a even though the power level at a baseline is higher, it's flatter. And I think that would be more interesting of a format than what we have now, where there's clearly a tier of cards well above everything else in the format. And those are the pillars of the format. Everything else feels like chaff being subsidized by those pillars. And there isn't actually any decisions to be making beyond like the 58th and 59th card or whatever. Like, okay, yeah, we're going to play 3 Triumph or 2 Triumph. We're playing 3 Murktide or 4 Murktide. But you know you're playing those cards with Beanstalk. There's no alternative. There's no other choice. Okay, I'm playing Bowmaster because I'm in black. I guess maybe I'll play a Thoughtseize or 2 in my Grixis Delver deck, or maybe I'll play the Stifle. Like those are not as interesting of choices as actual, like, okay, instead of us running into a 90% mirror every single game, where my Bowmaster and your Bowmaster and we're just playing Bowmasters back and forth at each other. Like, oh, actually, I'm going to play this Dread Arcanist against your Bowmaster. Fuck you, figure it out, right?
Yeah.
Like. Oh, well, okay. Do you want to check the graveyard in some meaningful way, like to deal with my Murktide as well? Like, who knows? Am I even doing that stuff if we have options, right? Am I playing some variation? If I'm playing 2 Bowmaster, 2 Dreadhorde Arcanist, and you're thinking like, how am I supposed to parry my tools, my removal suite against these different things, and how to actually line those tools up in a game? I think that's going to lead to way more diverse and like replayable experiences than when you just sit down and go Bowmaster first. Okay, Bowmaster, your Bowmaster, Bowmaster, your Bowmaster. You know?
Well,
that's my hypothesis.
Yeah,
my hypothesis is that
it's more a thesis to me, actually. And I was going to say, with that as your thesis, I think this being the first episode of the new year, we have a lot in store for everybody this coming year. Obviously, the takes are hot right now. So
I don't even know if is the take even all that hot. I'm just thinking
it's not that it's hot. It's impassioned. Is the word I'm looking for. I think it's impassioned.
I want us as a community to think just a little bit deeper into these play patterns, as opposed to only what we remember of getting buried by cards. Because in the assessment of something like, okay, if Dreadhorde Arcanist and Bowmaster existed at the same time, and it's like, okay, well, Bowmaster can't tag the Dreadhorde Arcanist, but if Dreadhorde Arcanist doesn't have like a bolt to deal with the Bowmaster, but has a cantrip, and okay, I'll attack, but I can't cast the cantrip because then I'll blow up your army, and then your army blocks my Dreadhorde Arcanist, and that's bad, so maybe I don't even swing, but now my Dreadhorde Arcanist is holding back both of your 1/1s, and that's interesting, and now there's tension. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, we're not thinking at that, we're not thinking like, oh, what if the Arcanist attacks into it,
Phil,
and then what does that look like? We're not thinking about that.
Phil, have you ever watched Jerry Springer?
Who's the father?
No, that's I think that's Geraldo. Jerry Springer is the one where this is the small aside, but so that's the one where everyone fights on stage. Like, you're guaranteed like a fight at the on Jerry Springer. But there's always that moment at the end where he like sits down, he brings it back, and he's just like, hey, take care of each other, blah blah, peace and stuff. And I was in the middle of that when you came in with a chair and just started beating the living.
By God,
another guy right in front of me. You're like, tell for secrets.
It's Forcifield with the steel chair.
Yeah, because I the plan was to end there. But no, you're right. I think the thesis you set forth is correct, and I think that like I said, we've got the unbanned episode coming up, and that's going to be an interesting point. I think there's going to be a lot of passion there, and you know what else the community needs? More of us, and what we need from the community is more funding. So if you can go to patreon.com/eternaldurdles, that's my shameless plug for the day. And I think we can end it there. Thanks everybody for watching.
Yeah, I feel like I don't know what I'm even talking about.
Have a good one, everyone. For the gift that keeps on giving all year round, join our Patreon at patreon.com/eternaldurdles. And hey, check out this playlist we got up here with all of our interviews over the last couple of years. Some great people from the Legacy community, some really great guests.